Hello, Bookaholics. Today we are being joined by Donna Ferris, whose debut book is her memoir of all things. Really heavy, heavy stuff to make your memoir your debut book. It's titled, We've Got to Stop Meeting Like This. So let's talk to Donna after this. Hi, Donna. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Deidre?
I'm doing great. Welcome to the Bookaholic podcast.
It's so good to be here. Thank you so much, and it's an honor.
Yes, yes. So today we're going to address your memoir, which seems very intense. It's a debut memoir. So before we get into your story, let's first talk about your writing journey. Now, this is your debut memoir. Is this indeed your debut book?
It is. It's the first book I ever wrote.
Mm. Okay, okay. So you have to be really brave to dive in to do your debut book as a memoir. Would you agree?
Uh, I think naive might have been the better word for me, frankly. Um, I think I didn't realize how hard it is to write a memoir. I think I just needed to write
Mm.
my way out of a thing that I was going through.
Mhm,
And, I had a
mhm,
choice in that process of writing maybe a self-help book, which is one of the things I thought about,
mhm.
and or a memoir. And the writing person I was working with actually said, which shelf do you want to be on? Do you want to be on memoir
Right,
or do you want to be on self-help? And it was a conscious choice at
right.
that point to pick memoir, but I had no idea what I was getting into, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. Now, on one hand, though, a memoir is the best story that we all know. You
It
know,
is.
it's the one story we all know.
It is, but as you I know you're really aware, is that there's a lot of soul searching to make it readable. There's a lot of soul searching that has to be done. And you can start out writing your story thinking you understand that story. And for me,
Yeah,
anyway, I learned a lot about myself. And to make it readable, you have to learn to love all of the characters in your life, even if they're not
yes,
entirely lovable. So it was an incredible journey for me, and one I'm really
yes.
thankful for.
Yes, I can see that, and I can see how writing your memoir will have to make you face you. Can be your scariest enemy is you, you versus yourself. So
Yes.
yeah, that could be very tough. And I'm watching the Showtime series First Ladies, and I'm not sure if
Oh,
you're
yes.
aware or watched that, but
Yeah.
really, actually, I'm totally intrigued by the Betty Ford story. And Betty Ford, as we know, she really is kind of like really responsible for our mammograms that we get because she had the breast cancer scare. And then she is responsible for a lot of people facing the fact that you have an addiction and you need to go to rehab. And so I watched that. I've been watching and I watched the latest show and where they portrayed her intervention between the president, her children, a former maid, and they all, and even though this was the show, Michelle Pfeiffer portrays Betty Ford, it got next to you. You were like, oh my goodness, Betty Ford had to do this. The first lady, she had to share a room at the rehab facility with other people. I mean, you begin to just kind of think about all the things that, and we know this is a dramatic portrayal, but we also know these things happen to Betty Ford. So that just is a force to be reckoned with. And I bring that up because sobriety is part of your story as well. And the cringingness to say one word, which is not the whole spectrum of the recognition of it, but all the things you have to go through mentally and physically to overcome, say, alcoholism or drug use or whatever you may be facing in that realm. So you took not just a memoir of, oh, your excellent service or career that you were doing. You had several issues that seem almost like it's reading like a novel, from divorce to betrayal to sobriety. That's a lot. That's a lot. So I would say naturally you wrote this book because of those things, but what really just triggered you to write all this down?
I think I started this book has kind of two parts to it. The first part of the book uh, was really written to get through a period of time after my divorce, and I thought it was an
Mm,
interesting story to talk about the yoga aspects and what yoga and wellness and all that philosophy how it helped me get through that time. So I
okay.
had a book written that was like that, and it was a little light. It was
Okay.
very chick litty kind of book. And
Mm-hmm.
then my life kind of fell apart. And again, so it was kind of like
Mm-hmm.
I had a difficult time, and then it got worse, right? And so,
Okay.
and then I, and then doing that second part of the book where things get worse, I actually had a writing coach at that time, and so then I really started to look at my life. And there's a whole theme in the book even about childhood uh, uh, abuse. And
Trauma.
I didn't want to put that in the book. And that was kind of
Yeah.
forced. So there's pieces that were forced in there. I think, and that in the end, the book was about me writing my way through my life and healing and finding a way to heal from my life, which is,
Mm-hmm.
it was a difficult life. It's not the worst life. Lots of people are having difficult times, but I think the
Right.
writing of it helped me process and learn and change in a lot of ways. Um, so I think that's why. I mean, I wrote to get myself out of a difficult time. I just thought that it was going to be a different ending than what it ended up, for sure. Yeah.
Right, right. So the catalyst was for the actual writing of the book was your divorce.
Yeah,
And
that
then
started it.
that made you soul search and you rediscovered, if you will, your childhood trauma. And
Identified it.
then yes. So did you have your childhood trauma blocked out?
I don't think I in a lot of ways, yeah. I think that there's a whole thing I don't really talk about a lot in the book, but I think the thing that happens to some of us, especially of my age, so I'm in my 50s. Our parents came
Mhm.
from World War II. They had a lot of trauma in their background, and then they didn't know how to handle it
Mhm.
with their kids. So there was a lot
Right.
of spanking in my life. There was a lot of spanking and abuse
Sure.
and verbal abuse.
Mhm.
And I think
Mhm.
you can go through life thinking that's normal, and then you have kids, and then you realize that you don't want to do that to your kids. And I think I was
Right.
probably, when I was starting this book, I had done that soul searching about the parent I wanted to be, but I hadn't really
Yeah.
evened out the idea of what my childhood was like. I was still kind of thinking I deserved my childhood a little bit, and the book really helped me work through that. I would say, I think,
Mhm.
and also helped me to stop pointing at my mother as such a evil, terrible person. It helped me heal that relationship, which was incredibly helpful.
Well, I will say to you, and I don't know how deep or what you're framing your childhood trauma as, but I do agree with you that my parents also went through the World War II. They were born in the 1920s. I'm in the same age range as you, and spankings were a part of your childhood. Now, thank God, I did not have brutal
Mm.
spankings or anything like that. It was just usually a result of me not being respectful or doing what I was told. Sometimes you would have that. And I think about that kind of thing as an African American. I think some of that from my perspective, comes from slavery, and from all of the past things. If you don't do what you're supposed to do, do what you're told, you get a spanking, or just like in
Mhm.
slavery, you get beatings and whippings. And so, like you, I realized, I'm gonna rear my children. I'm going to raise my children. They're not going to get away with anything. I didn't vow that I would never spank a child, but I realized I realized, and as they were born and growing up, I realized that wasn't really necessary. I certainly wasn't going to run around and chase a child down that disrespected me so that I could spank them. I was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be out of breath running down a kid. And I just found other tactics and other ways to not make spankings, whippings, as they used to say, a centralized part of my parenting, and so we just didn't do it. I'm feeling you there. I really agree with you there on that. I faced that myself as well. So
Yeah. Yeah,
going
there's a decision.
forward,
So there's a decision as a
go
mother,
ahead.
as a parent, to not do what was
Hmm.
done to you, right? And I think that was
Right.
that's a central part of my story. I think that the decision that I'm not going to be that person, that I'm going to change the generation, right? I'm going to make the generational
Right.
change so that I don't carry that forward.
Yes.
And you still we still make mistakes. I still make mistakes as a parent, but that was one I
Sure.
wasn't going to do.
Yeah. Right, exactly. I agree. And one of the things that I grew up with is I had great parents and a wonderful childhood. Okay. So there's that. And I didn't experience any. I lived very well. We had a nice home. My father owned a business. We were very well taken care of. I had a
Mm.
wonderful childhood overall. But I always wanted my mom to be Carol Brady, more the Carol Brady type. And she was not.
Yeah.
She was
Yeah.
not. And she was not like, at the time I thought she was just so mean and, like you were saying, wicked witch and all this
Mhm.
kind of stuff. But on her, as she was dying, I asked her, I was like, I can't let her die without me knowing. I asked her, why were you always so tough on me and hard on me? I was a good kid. I was a great student. I volunteered. I was a cheerleader. I was all these positive, wonderful things,
Mm.
and she was basically a person who came through the Depression and World War II.
Mhm.
She didn't want me to be soft. And I
That's
was like,
right.
oh, well, we
Mission
could have walked
accomplished.
out some things, right? Mission accomplished. Gosh, good gracious. So,
I know.
I'm glad I did that. And then that stopped me from being, once she passed away, from me still being like, oh, why did my mom do this to me? It ended there, and I could move forward.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I can really totally understand that. So now you, like many others, you grow up, you get married, and you think it's forever. And then,
Mm.
unfortunately for some, and maybe fortunately for some, so that you can get out of that mess, it's not forever. So you mentioned betrayal. So I assume your husband may have committed adultery, as they say, or infidelity.
Yes, he did. And he did it in a way that was interesting at the time. So he did it on a site for married people. So it was a dating site for married
Oh,
people. I know.
ew.
So it was an interesting way to do it. And the way I found out was because he had been sending flowers to this woman, and a reminder postcard came to the house for him to remember to send flowers for her birthday. Wasn't that nice? So I find
Wow.
that in the
That's
mail.
weird.
Yeah, I find that in the mail after we come back from this wonderful trip that we had as a family, this perfect vacation, and I had to face him and say, is there something you should tell me?" And he did admit it. So, the whole and that's where the book really begins is with that scene, which was a pretty devastating scene for me at the time.
Yeah, yeah. And so you had no inkling. You had no inkling. Once you found that piece of mail, that was just a total eye opener. You had no inkling of his affections. He was able to balance his affections and all of that.
I think that's a great question. I think that you always have an idea that something could be happening. I think you can sense
Hmm.
when But I think the other thing that, writing a memoir really gives you, is it I can't blame him for that anymore, like, because
Mhm.
I had exited the marriage myself in a lot of ways, like, I never
Okay,
cheated, physically
okay.
or even, like, flirting or, that kind of a thing with anybody,
Right, right,
but
right.
but I wasn't interested. I had a lot
Mhm.
of other interests, right? I focused solely on
Yeah,
my kids. I focused really a lot on my job. I was pretty successful, and I really just wasn't interested in his stuff. And so I
yeah,
can look back at that now. It's been 7 years.
yeah,
So I can
yeah,
look back at it and say, okay, I had a part in this. I had a big part in this. And to your point, I think we're
yeah.
both better off because of the change. But
Right.
in that moment when it happened, I was really mad.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but
Oh,
I'm a
of
lot better
course.
now. Yeah.
Yes, of course. Nobody wants to be betrayed.
No.
Betrayal, and I've laughed with my husband and said this, if you ever did something like that to me, I wouldn't be mad so much because I love you so much. It's because you have wasted my time. That's my,
On
and
got it.
I would
Yep.
I
That's
would think
exactly how I felt.
time,
Yeah, that's exactly how I
and
felt.
then
I was furious. I was
yes,
like, I could have
yes. I
dated all
mean,
these guys. I was traveling all the time, for work, and I was like,
yeah,
guys were always coming on to me. I mean, not all the time. I mean, look, I'm not that great, but
but
like but it happens, right? And I would just always be like,
it
I'm married,
happens.
Yeah,
Right.
I
Yeah,
just and
exactly. You're standing up for the valor of your marriage. I'm married, here's my ring. And then
exactly.
he just gave himself license. And, I dig it. I understand 100% what you're saying because it does
Yeah.
happen, and as soon as
Yep.
I'm away from my husband and my sons are not around, guys make, advances towards you. And then, so yeah, so for him to do that, and I can see you were furious,
I
furious,
was really
furious,
mad.
furious. You
Yeah.
know.
And it
And
and it
so,
really was a and it really was a yoga, teacher that took me out of that. He said, "What is your core
hmm,
belief about marriage?" And I said, "That you're married forever." And he said, "Well, what if
mhm,
that isn't the case? What if really, you're meant to be in a series of relationships that teach you how to love others, but most importantly, how to love yourself?" And,
mhm.
that deflated my whole anger. I was, like, immediately like that,
Wow,
out of it. And I was like,
wow,
"Wow, that was pretty cool what you just did." And he goes I go, "What is that? What did you do?" And he goes, "That's yoga therapy. We focused on your core belief and we deflated it." We basically looked at it and said, "Okay, maybe that's not true
wow, wow. Yeah, and maybe it's not true for you. I mean, if you're married
for me."
to, say, let's say, an abusive person, surely you find out marriage is not going to be forever.
Right? Which hopefully, right?
So
And I
right,
think
exactly.
and it we will get into relationships for where we are, and we're looking for things in that partner to solve things for where we are in that time, but we change. I mean, 20 years
Hmm.
of marriage is a long time, and we changed.
Yeah,
I mean, I can look at it
yeah.
now a little more analytically. At the time, not so much, as I said.
Right, exactly. Most definitely. And I think anybody listening to this interview would be able to totally relate. That was a heck of and I'll go one step further. That was a hell of a yoga teacher.
But he's really good. He's really, really good. And he taught me for the next 3 years. So I took yoga teacher training and then I took a yoga therapy training certificate. So a lot of that work was really important. And as I, in the book go out to, I start online dating and I start, meeting new people and that's all in the book. I was able to take my ideas about love, the things I was
Mhm.
learning about love and accepting situations and people the way they are as opposed to
Right,
how I wanted them to be. So there was a lot of
right.
that happens in the book, which is very helpful.
Oh,
Helped me a lot.
yes, yes, very helpful. Unfortunately, we learned this lesson, what you're speaking of, either out of toiling, and I use the word toiling for a reason, through marriage for 20 something years, and you finally realize you just said, or we have the betrayal situation and we come to that realization. Neither
It's true.
one is healthy. But
Or
I think
or
about
fun.
all the young women. I think about all the young women that get married and they think, and they'll say, "Oh, he makes me happy," or the men, "She makes me happy," and I'm like, "Oh Lord."
Mm,
You gotta be
nope.
happy. Oh, no, you gotta be happy yourself first,
Yep.
and it just enhance the happiness of someone else's, and they enhance your happiness, but don't lean on
That's
somebody to
right.
make you happy. I'm just saying, if
Mhm.
somehow that yoga teacher could do premarital therapy before,
Yeah.
because a lot of people need to realize that, I don't want to be the spoil sport and say it may not last forever, but people need to be in some type of more realism before they walk down that aisle.
I totally agree with you. I think, and it's also the idea that you can't change the person. So you need to like them as they are now. I mean, I'm not saying that they won't change over the time that you're together, but you're
Right,
never going to
right,
have
right,
any say in that change. I think that's really
right.
important for people to realize. Your husband is
Mm.
not a project. You know,
No,
if you
no,
want to if you
no.
want to design things, redo your house. Don't try to redo your husband.
Right.
It's never going to work.
Correct. Correct. And that's where a lot of women, a lot, and this, and I'm only speaking of this because I know of this, a lot of successful Black women are single and they're very successful in their careers. And they're like, I'm so successful in my career. Why can't I find someone who, why can't I be successful in my relationship? And that's because possibly a lot of those women are taking on a project. A husband, a relationship is not a project, like you said. So
Yeah, you want a
now that we got
partner,
this,
but it's hard.
exactly, exactly. Um,
Yeah.
and depending on where that person is coming from, they may not be a partnership material, partnership minded. That doesn't make them a hideous and horrible human being, though. They just might
No,
not have arrived there.
no. And I think it was funny, like after it's at one point in the book, a friend of mine and I are sitting down having margaritas and guacamole, and we
Mhm,
start making a list of
mhm,
what we wanted in a man. And a big part of
mhm.
that was a big part of what we wanted was somebody who already has done the work on themselves. I think that's a big thing. You know,
Yes, yes,
I mean, they don't have to have done therapy necessarily, but they have to be self-aware. And
right,
that's a big one.
right. That's a big one, because a little bit sometimes men are not in that frame of thought. Women are more in that kind of frame of thought. They probably tend to read more self-help or seeking answers.
Mhm.
But because of the patriarchal construct, a lot of men think things okay because it's going their way 9 times out of 10. But that's kind of like what I was relating to. Uh, either sometimes you'll have these betrayals or you'll have that plotting and toiling through a marriage for 20 plus years, and then you finally, it's like, oh yeah, I can't make this person do what I want them to do, and I have to accept that. So you
Right.
either do one of those others, and like you said, yeah, it would be amazing to find a guy who's done all of that processing on himself, definitely.
Yeah, and then you also have to be attracted to them too. I mean, so that's the
Yeah,
thing is, somebody could have done all that work, and then you're just not attracted to them, right? So
right, right.
it's a really tough one. I mean, I think there's a lot in there to try to figure out. I mean, it's amazing any of us get married in the first place
It's
with all of that.
amazing. It's
It's amazing.
amazing any of us get married in the first place. Well, let's go on to your alcoholism,
Sure,
correct?
sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And how did you like anybody else, sounds like you got together with girlfriends, you said just having a margarita. How did you
Oh,
get
yeah.
all the way there? How did you get all the way to alcoholism?
That's a great question. So I actually, when I finished writing the book, I put it out to beta readers. And one of the beta readers,
Mhm.
and I had written all these scenes where I had blacked out or I had, really difficult times because of drinking. But I thought that was normal, just like the spanking part. I thought that was normal. And the beta reader said to me after she read the book, she said, "Hey, Donna." and we're on a Zoom call, and she's looking at me in the face, and she says, "Hey, I am really disappointed you didn't spend more time on your drinking problem." And I was like, "Wait a minute." And I had
Wow.
never had anybody tell me I had a drinking problem, right? And
Wow.
although I'm sure people thought, but I looked like most of my friends in terms of drinking. I didn't, I didn't interrupt my
Mhm.
job. It looked normal.
Right.
But internally, I
Right.
knew that I was drinking more than I would like. And I had to
Right.
step back and I go, yeah, I guess I should have written more about the drinking problem. And at that point, I was like,
Yeah.
okay, well, wait a minute. That was the first time I ever said those words.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
about 3 days later, I listened to a podcast with Dan Harris, 10% Happier, and Annie Grace, who runs the This Naked Mind, and she writes
Mhm.
something called The Alcohol Experiment, where you try to be alcohol-free for 30
Right.
days. And,
Mhm.
I listened to that podcast, and I signed up, right in the middle of the street with my dog, pulling away at the leash. I just was like, "I'm gonna sign
Yeah.
up for this because I must have a drinking problem." And I've been sober since. So I've been sober, I think 470 some days. I mean, I don't count exactly, but I'm due to post probably around 500 days, the 500 days mark, and I've been looking at that, but it hasn't
Mhm.
been hard for me. I
Okay.
think
Okay.
I'm what they call a gray area drinker. I think, but I think if I had kept going, I could have bottomed out, at some point.
Yeah.
But I didn't, I
Yeah.
didn't by the grace of,
Yeah.
God and Buddha, I
Yes.
didn't. But
Yeah.
that was my story. So the book really, not only did it, help me heal from the things I went through, but it helped me get sober.
Wow, exactly. So you were actually, it sounds like that Betty Ford moment, but you didn't have to have horrible intervention. But the friend, I
No.
guess once she read that you were blacking out or had blacked out,
Mhm.
I mean that's serious. That's
Mhm.
some serious stuff. So
And then and then what I did is I went back over the book and I wrote in the thoughts. So I had written the scenes that had happened, but I didn't write in the thoughts I was having. But there was a lot of internal
mhm.
things like, why do I keep doing this? Why can't I remember
Mhm.
that wine doesn't solve anything? Why can't I stop
Mhm.
at 2? Which was happening. I mean, those thoughts were definitely
Right.
there. I mean, and I was such a social drinker and I had drank so much through my work, um, that, it slipped. I mean, it slipped into being much more of my life than I really wanted it to be. And I
Yeah.
don't miss it.
Yeah.
And I don't think I would have
Right.
finished this book if I had been drinking still. I mean, I
Oh,
wouldn't have had
probably
the time,
not.
you know?
Yeah. Oh, you wouldn't have had the time. You would have been, preoccupied with drinking for one, possibly blacking out. I mean, the blackout part really just takes me, all the way there. I mean, that was scary. That's frightening.
It is
And
scary.
so, and nobody else besides that person alluded to, like your children, Mom, I don't know, because we had to cook for ourselves because we weren't cooking anything, and so because you were drunk.
Yeah. No, my kids, so I'll say this. I think neither one of my kids, denied my so a lot of people in my life, when I told them that I was stopping
Mhm.
drinking because I was having an issue with it, most were very
Mhm.
surprised. Most would give you the, "Oh," some of it was like, "Well, I drink like you," that, it was that kind of thing. "You couldn't have a drinking
Mhm.
problem because I don't have a drinking problem."
Right,
Um,
right, right, right.
but my kids didn't have that reaction. They didn't. I think that's,
Okay.
for me, that's the most telling. I think that
Yes.
they accepted that I quit. They were
Yes.
they didn't say much more than that. They weren't, but they were very
Right.
supportive of the quitting. So
Right, 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 right.
so you can read into that. I think that's an awkward thing for a kid. I think for them to come out with more than that.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah, because, going back to Betty Ford, the portrayal, the
Mhm.
dramatic portrayal, her kids at that time, this is the '70s, and they were telling her, the one son was like, "Mom, I did most of the cooking at the time because you were drunk and, you weren't eating, but we were hungry." And so there was that. And, kids are so afraid of their parents a little bit, not in a
Mhm.
bad way, but just because
No.
to respect the authority, you don't wanna just tell your mother off the cuff, "Hey, you drink." you're drunk, you're drinking, you don't want to chastise your mother because you're taught not to do something like that. But, they may have noticed some things,
Oh, I'm
and
sure.
then they just been silently relieved that, oh, good, she's not going to do that anymore, and then
Yeah,
they
I
just, you know,
yeah, definitely. I mean, and my daughter's the one that put me on she put me on an Arbonne cleanse for 30 days. That was one of the first times I'd quit. Like I quit for days. I didn't quit. That didn't cause me to quit for the full 30 days, but I did try going without wine, which was really important. I think that was a
mhm.
good first step because I think if you're used to drinking every day, it's hard for you to imagine not doing that.
Right,
You think you
right,
might have a
right, right.
dependency, but the reality, like less than 10% of people have an actual dependency. So it just is uncomfortable, but you can do without it. It's a habit for most people. It's a habit.
Right, exactly. It does nothing for you, it's just a social construct. And so,
Yeah.
it's right, you really don't need it at all, Now, so how did you tie up your memoir? You're alive, it's not you're a
Yep.
live person, this is a memoir, so it's not a novel that you try to tie up very neatly at the end. How did you not to give away the ending,
That's
but
fine.
how do you tie up a memoir of that? You just tie up that period of time or life, or how did you go about closing that out?
I think that's one of the hardest questions that I had. I mean, it's a great question, and no one's asked it yet, so I appreciate it. Um, I spent about a good 6 months looking for the ending for my memoir. I mean, I think it was funny the way it ends, um, it happened to me, but I immediately went back to my room. I was at Kripalu. The memoir begins and ends at Kripalu, which is the number one yoga, retreat center in the country, and I'm actually doing a workshop there in October. Um,
Oh,
but I know, which is like a full circle moment. But so
yes.
I had what happened at the end of the book happen to me, and I went right back to my room at this retreat and just started writing because I was like, okay, that's it. And
Uh,
I kept praying for an ending that would make sense. And it did. It
yes.
was just
Yeah.
it was a magical, it pulled all the things because this novel has a mystical novel memoir has mystical elements too, and it tied all of
Mhm,
those
mhm.
pieces in. So I was really blessed with an ending, but it took a long time. I mean, it takes a long time to find it because you don't know how to. Your life is so huge; it's very hard to figure out how
Yeah.
to put it together in a way that's readable in 300 pages or less. I mean, it's a tough
Yes.
thing.
Yes, and you don't want to insult the reader and then to say, "Hey, now I got through my divorce and I got through alcoholism, and so now you don't want to insult anybody with that. Now everything is all fine and dandy." You want to have a realistic kind of culmination of everything that you've been talking about. So that's great. I'm glad you were able to find that. And if you want to find the end of Donna's story for that time period, you can pick up her memoir. So keep that in mind. Now, let me go a little bit into the writer's workshop aspect of your story. So you said you worked with let's see here. Now, let me make sure, writing coach. You did
I
mention a
did.
writing coach that helped you. How did you find your writing coach?
So I have a really good friend named Jennifer Shelter, who also uses the same writing coach, and that's how I found her. I mean, I think it's really important as a writer to network with your friends that are writers.
Mhm.
It'll help you find things, but it's not always easy to get the coaches and the editors. You kind of have to have work and be doing work. So I was publishing a lot of articles, and things
Mhm.
out in the world. So that helped me get the coach and the editor. But it's really helpful to have somebody. And for me, even though I have a background in the arts and I in screenwriting to a certain extent, undergrad,
Mhm.
it
Mhm.
really helped me to have a real coach that taught um, memoir writing because it's a different
Right.
animal and there was a lot to
Yes.
think
Yes.
about.
Yes. Yes. Yes, yes. While doing this podcast, I have a series called the Writer's Workshop, in which I have
Right.
interviewed various book coaches along the way, different people in publishing to help avid readers, possibly, or a lot of times frustrated writers.
Mhm.
And so I thought that was important to bring to my audience. And so, yes, and before I did this podcast, I had no idea there was such a thing as a writer's coach.
Yeah.
Writing says, you either good at it or you weren't, or, and you wrote your manuscript and you sent it off, whatever. I had a very old fashioned sense of how people are getting their books done today, but thank goodness for the writing coach. And there, like you were saying, you specifically had a memoir writing coach. I have run into a variety of very specific writing coaches. One that I've interviewed did it for historical fiction. So
Right.
yes, so definitely for anybody out there who may be struggling or a budding writer, there are writers coaches out there. Please listen to the Writers Workshop series here on my channel.
Oh,
So,
good.
Donna, are you going to write any more books? Are you going to, after you've written your memoir and you've gotten all of that off your chest for now, are you going to write other books, like novels or anything like that?
Yes, so I always wanted to write a mystery. That was always my plan.
Ooh,
I love a Janet Ivanovich. I love, Agatha
yeah.
Christie. I love, all of
Mm.
those, the typical mysteries. I'm a big mystery fan. So I have one in place. I really do want to go away from memoir as much as possible because I think I'm done talking about my life right now. So a
Yeah.
mystery, but I am basing the mystery on I did lose my memory at one point in my life, and so I'm
Oh,
basing it on that time. But, no one
oh, yes.
died when I lost my memory, but in the book, somebody will die. So
Right.
that's what I'm doing with that. And then I'm also doing workshops around, managing change with grace, which is kind of it's I do a workshop that's called that, and so I'm working on a book of that title too. So some of the
Yes.
tools that I learned to get through the time in the book in my memoir, I'm taking those and distilling them into a workshop and then a book.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Now, how will your workshop work? Will it be in person or only online, or a kind of combination of two, hybrid?
I do both. So I've been doing the workshop at libraries and bookstores and yoga studios, and then that's the one I'm doing at Kripalu in the fall. So, and then I also do it
Wonderful.
online. So sometimes it works both ways. It just depends on where we are with COVID, and how comfortable
Yes.
people are being in person.
Yes, most definitely. Well, of course, in the podcast show notes and in the description box under the YouTube video, we're going to have your contact and social media
Oh,
information, from whether it's a website, all your social media, to the link to your workshop at the yoga retreat,
great.
so that people can come in there and they can purchase tickets to join you. We want to have all your contact information so that people can take part of your information, which is really wonderful.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. The easiest way to find me is to Google Donna Ferris yoga and you'll find me. It's kind
Oh,
of it's kind of
okay.
ridiculous. Yeah.
Well,
So
you must have slayed the Google giant, Donna Fair.
Donna Ferris yoga and you'll
Hey,
find my website.
wonderful. If all else is to fail, you can remember that. Donna
Exactly.
Ferris
Fair.
Yoga. Google it.
Exactly.
Okay, well, Donna, thank you so much for joining me here today. Very enlightening. We appreciate you giving of your story, and informing people, of your story. I'm sure a lot of people will be able to glean a lot from it, maybe grow from it, and realize they don't have to go down these paths by themselves, or they can seek help, and move on with their life.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. This has been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. And so don't forget, just check these show notes and look out for the information for Donna Ferris. Donna, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining the Bookaholic podcast. We appreciate your support. Remember to subscribe to the podcast, follow us on Instagram at True Bookaholic. You can also email us at readingjunkie@book.com. book-a-holic.com. Don't forget to support your local library and independent bookstores.